could just go around the room so I can hear your name, not that I will remember them all, and maybe what you're here for. What do you want to hear?
That's it.
Jack. So what do you want to hear? What do you want to hear about?
What you have.
Okay.
I'm Ray. I want you to tell us our electricity is reliable.
Okay. Good. I'll talk about that.
I'm Cheryl, and I'd like you to tell us how the electric cooperative relates to Green Mountain Power. I don't understand quite the Vermont system.
Okay. Sure.
Ingrid Barrett, and I'm from New Hampshire, so no specific questions.
Okay.
Ann Nilsson, no specific questions.
Carol Hamill, I'm ignorant, so I guess I'm just here to learn something.
Okay.
My name is Margaret, and I'd like to learn how the New England grid can be improved.
Okay.
Linda Norland, and maybe the directions that the cooperative is going to make viability in the future.
Okay.
I'm Betsy Eaton, and people have used Green Mountain Power, like Vermont Electric, I saw New England. How does it all go together?
Michael Kolakowski, and I wanted to know what the electric company doesn't want me to know.
Okay.
My name is Hank, and I can't add anything to the questions that have been asked already.
Rick Hutchins, I'd like to know if it's possible for 50% of the population to be off the grid in 50 years.
Okay.
Ed Becker, wondered if you could explain a little bit about renewable energy credit.
Okay.
I'm Ben Gilson, and my questions have all been asked.
Steve Maddock, I have a solar array on my barn, and I'm curious to why Vermont and New Hampshire have different systems of crediting users.
Great.
I'm Steve, and I think if you answer all these questions, I'll be more than happy.
Okay. And your questions?
They've covered it all.
Okay. How about you two over there?
Kathy Wilkerson, and I'm just interested in learning. I'm also curious about the renewable.
Okay.
Steve Wilkerson, equally. It's something we live with every day and very little understanding.
Okay.
And he couldn't find our leader.
So I'm going to, I'll start by, there's really three key concepts that I want you to understand as we move through this discussion. And one is inertia. Inertia is whatever is in motion has a tendency to remain in motion. So can anybody think of an example of inertia that you could tell the rest of the class? You give it that concept.
Push your car on a flat surface, and it keeps rolling after you stop pushing.
Keeps rolling. Very, very good. And a car going down a hill, right? If you're going down a hill and you got some inertia behind you, you'll go up over the little humps without having to step on the gas. That's inertia. Inertia is a very important, basic law of physics that I'm going to talk about in the grid because it's extremely important and it's boring, but I'll try to keep it interesting. The other concept is capacity factor. Capacity factor is really how you utilize equipment. Has anybody here worked in manufacturing? Raise your hand if you've worked in manufacturing before. Okay, so you know about capacity on a machine, right? You know capacity machine? What is capacity on a machine? How do you figure that?
It's the limitation.
Yeah, it's the limitation, right? So capacity on the grid is simply stated. I'll say what the formula is. There's no test, so you don't have to remember. The formula is nameplate capacity over time over the actual. It's actually the actual output over time over the nameplate capacity over time. So nameplate capacity is simply whether it's the generator or the solar panel, what it's capable of producing. So if we take a solar panel, because how many people here have solar panels? Raise your hand. Okay, solar panel. Take a solar panel array of 1 kilowatt. 1 kilowatt is the nameplate capacity, which means that this will produce 1 kilowatt when the sun's shining bright. Now, the way we measure capacity is we take that, we multiply that times 8760 hours. That's the number of hours in a year. So if you have a generator, or you have we also measure our transmission lines and our distribution lines for the same. It's got a nameplate capacity. If you run it full for 87, 60 hours every year, you're at 100% capacity factor. Now, in the case of solar, a good example is solar produces at a 15% capacity factor. Now, that's not to get confused with how much the sun shines, because the sun's shining right now, but what's going on outside right now? Why wouldn't we have 100% solar production as you look outside? It's cloudy, right. So a cloudy day, typically you get 30 or 40% depending on the intensity of the clouds. Wind projects typically run about 30% capacity factor. So meaning if you take the total number of hour years, the total nameplate capacity, and how much you got, it's about 30%. And every generator that we have on the system, that capacity factor is very important. And I'll tie it back to inertia in a minute, because that's tied. And then the third component is public policy. And public policy is, we all scramble with public policy to get it right. And our success, you can judge that over time. Now I want to talk about Vermont Electric Co-op itself, and I'll answer the question about Green Mountain Power and all the other things that go along with we're going to start getting into some of that public policy stuff. So Vermont Electric Co-op, we serve like this northern gray area in Vermont, northern third. We serve 18 of the 25 poorest towns in Vermont, but we also serve some of the richest towns in Vermont. So we have a good mix in terms of the ability to pay for the infrastructure. We've always been a technology leader. We're recognized across the country for being a technology leader. And I'm going to explain the difference between us and Green Mountain Power right now. Green Mountain Power is what's called an investor-owned utility. An investor-owned utility operates to make a profit, and that profit is regulated by the state and federal government. So there's an allowable amount of profit that an investor-owned utility can make and return it to its shareholders. Now, 25% of America's landmass is served by investor-owned utilities. The other 75% is served by electric cooperatives. There's close to 1,000 cooperatives nationwide. We all operate under the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, which is out of Arlington, Virginia. I happen to be the vice chair of the Technology Advisory Committee for the NRECA, so I get to play with a lot of nice toys. But cooperatives were set up by executive order by FDR in 1936. He wrote the order to say, look, somehow rural America has to get electricity because there's no business case to support the investor-owned utilities going into rural America. 75% of the landmass at the time didn't have electricity. And the business case, sorry, Meredith.
Oh, no, I'm delighted you're here. That's all I can say. I'm just delighted.
So the business case is not much different financially today than it was late 30s. And cooperatives were set up following the 7 cooperative principles that were founded by the Rochdale Cooperative, like way back in the late 1800s in England. Anybody familiar with the 7 cooperative principles? Raise your hand if you've heard of them. Well, cooperatives, we have a set of principles we operate under. We're not for profits, but that doesn't mean that we have the freedom to run poorly. We have to run with very tight financials. And I'm proud to say that Vermont Electric Co-op, we're rated by Standard & Poor's as an A+ rated company. So we're financially sound. The technology has helped us get there. Back in 2006, we were a BBB- with a negative outlook, which means we were just above junk bond status. But the reason we were able to be successful is because of our investments in technology. And this is getting to, somebody asked the question, they want to know, if 50% of people get off the grid in 50 years, and it's going to be highly dependent on technology. And I'll get to that as well. Now we have, if you're on our system, you can see your usage. We have smart meters. We've had them in since 2005. If you have a power outage, we'll either text you or email you when the outage occurs and when it's going to restore. We give estimated time of restoration. The technology has helped us tremendously. We've been cut our outages by 2/3 since 2006 by the use of technology. So we're very good from a reliability. This SAIFI, That's called the System Average Interruption Frequency Index. It's how many outages you have a year. And that's a standard used all across the nation with investor-owned utilities and cooperatives. It's kind of one of our key performance indicators. How many times should power go out in our system? The average person, it goes out 1.5 times a year. And the average length of the outage is a little over 2 hours. So you lose your power 3 hours a year on our system on average. We also have some of the best outage performance in the nation as well. And we're committed to Vermont. Now this gets to the why utilities exist. You've got investor-owned utilities that are serving the more dense areas. For example, the average density of a cooperative is 7 customers per mile. The average of a investor-owned utility is around 125 customers per mile. So we got that mile of service still requires almost the same amount of costs. So we have typically a very much more difficult cost structure. People often ask, why are our rates higher? Well, because we serve rural America. Now, our rates are still within 10% of Green Mountain Power, which we're pretty proud of. For the past 7 years, our average rate increase has been below 1%, which is less than half the rate of inflation. Many people say, well, how come my electric rates go up? Well, you should ask that question, how come everything goes up? Because our cost pressures are the same as everybody else's. So the fact we're able to keep our rates half of the rate of inflation is pretty impressive. But that's enough bragging. This complex drawing here is where the grid is today and the future. The person who said, where's the grid going to be in 50 years? Well, I can't tell you specifically where it's going to be in 50 years, but I'll tell you what we're working towards. So if you looked at the grid just 15 years ago, we had centralized generation, and that centralized generation was all controlled by a parent organization called the Independent System Operator. We're part of ISO New England. ISO New England, their job is to keep the lights on in New England. There's 13 ISOs across the nation. ISO New England covers the New England states. Basically, their job is to make sure enough power is coming in to meet the needs of all the power going out. And the grid is considered an unstable system from the physics world, meaning it can collapse in a heartbeat. And we've seen that happen several times. The latest time that we had a massive collapse was September of 2014, and it was 50 million people lost power. Anybody remember that power outage? I'm not sure if it impacted New Hampshire too much, but certainly hit Ohio to New York City, up into Canada. It was all caused by one power line sagging into a tree in Ohio. So that shows you the instability of our grid. I will tell you, the grid's no more stable today. I would argue it's less stable than it was then. And I'll get to the reasons why in a minute. But the ISO New England's job is to make sure that it's just like a lake. There's power flowing in, and when the lake has water coming in, it has water coming out. As long as the water coming in doesn't exceed the water going out, the level stays stable. If the water going out exceeds the water coming in, the level drops. So there's a whole bunch of cautionary indicators that ISO New England looks at. And they make sure that there's reserve spinning generation on the grid at all times, so that in case something happens, there's enough spare power to keep that water level stable. Because the grid can collapse in 3 or 4 cycles of a sine wave, which, sine wave's like 15 milliseconds. So you talk about, within 1/10 of a second, you can get a grid collapse. So it's very important that we have enough spinning reserve. Now, I'll get to the reasons why in a minute, but let me talk about this evolution of our grid. Today, we have things like solar panels. We have the evolution of storage occurring. Storage is not very ubiquitous at this point, but we're certainly looking at it. And the interesting thing about rates is end-use solar on your home, is about twice as expensive as a utility scale solar. So if you take your home and you put one unit, every home you put a solar panel up, well, it's going to be much more efficient if you put it in a centralized location. So we have this double tension that we're trying to, at least in Vermont, we're trying to deal with. People don't like to see the rates go up, but they want solar power. Now, we can give people solar power and not have the rates go up, but it has to be done in solar fields to take advantage of efficiency. Does anybody have any idea why a solar field is much less expensive than a panel on your roof?
I would say
Economy of scale.
Economy of scale, yeah, go ahead.
you've got your requirement for the equipment to be able to go both ways, as well as also just maintenance for the grass, the snow removal, you name it. Perhaps positioning is more effective.
Yep.
Rather than position of a house using
Yep.
a roof or.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's like, making your meal at home or making it at the cafeteria. And so it's just economies of scale. For every rooftop solar, you've got to put an inverter, you've got to do an interconnection, you've got to pay attention to all those things. Where if you get a field, you only have to do one of those connections for an entire solar field. So we can do renewables, and we can do it at a place where your rates go up. But if you don't like the looks of it, now that gets into the rate discussion. Now we're in the public policy component, which says, and believe me, in Vermont, we're in the middle of this incredible tension. People say, we don't like those wind turbines on the roof, on the ridge line. And of course, you're looking at the person who led the project to build the Kingdom Community Wind Project. I basically predicted that would be the last major wind project in Vermont, because all the Vermonters wanted wind. But when you see them up on the ridge lines, no, not so good. But they had to see it. They had to see it first. But again, wind. Now let's talk about, I think I'll get into this later. I will hold the thought about wind and solar and how that balances with renewables. But ultimately, the grid right now, our grid, has about, during a peak day, we have about 11% on a peak July day, about 11% of the power is being generated from behind the meter. So that means it's generated in homes or businesses. So we're at 11%. I want you to hold that thought, because I'll come back to that. But ultimately, the grid, which was made for one-way flow, now has two-way flow. Now, I want to couple another concept. I want to get back to the inertia concept. When we talked about inertia, we talked about a body in motion tends to stay in motion. This whole grid was designed for motor-based generation. They have rotors and flywheels that keep those things going around. I'm a utility manager. I'm also a recovering engineer, which you may have figured out at this point. But I love a spinning generator. Spinning generators are great. They're easy to deal with. You look at the output of a spinning generator, it's nice and smooth, it's clean. And why is that? Because everything we've designed, including that computer, has been designed to convert that spinning 60-cycle sine wave into a signal that can be used to do work. So now we've got these, what are wind and solar, we've got these intermittent sources. And even though you see the blade spinning up there on this big wind turbine, it's still not a spinning generator, because it has to go through a conversion circuit. Now these conversion circuits have two major problems. One is a lot of electrical noise, and I'll get back into what that means in a minute. But they also don't have inertia. So if you get something that happens within a couple of milliseconds, just like a car going down the hill, your generator can ride through it. The solar and wind can't ride through it. And so this is producing a tremendous challenge to keeping the grid reliable. And I'll come back to that as well. But ultimately, what I'm showing you here is and believe me, you've probably figured out at this point, I love what I do. Because the challenge to solve this problem, probably one of the most biggest technical challenges we've ever faced on the planet, is how to get to renewables. Because of that inertia issue, because the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and we're not very good at forecasting the weather. So, but the responsibility for the grid reliability, which used to be centralized and used to occur out of 13 centers, ours is in Bridgeport, Connecticut, with all these sophisticated engineers, 150 engineers per hour looking at the grid, with all kinds of complex software, but not complex enough, has now transferred to people like me. So now you're looking at grid reliability being our job rather than the ISO's job, which I'm optimistic that I'm up to the challenge. Next slide. So let's talk about distribution system operators a little more. Basically, the distribution system operator, which by the way, this term was just coined probably 2 years ago by the person who was in charge of ISO, but it really captures it well. Distribution system operator will have high level of distributed energy resources. This DER term means distributed energy resources. Multi-directional energy flows and multi-level optimizations. By the way, we don't even have the software or even the computer horsepower to figure this out yet, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So basically, if you go into our control center, we've got this, again, very proud of a control center, probably one of the most advanced in the country. And our operators now are responsible for that grid. Because just like the sagging power line in Ohio that caused 50 million people to lose power, this same thing can happen now, but we have to have our distribution system operators watching this carefully. No, by the way, remember, we're leading the nation in terms of technology. I would say 2/3 of the utilities don't even have the capacity to get there yet. Duke Energy, the largest utility in the East Coast, has set a goal to have half of their substations under what's called SCADA control in 3 years. We have 100% of ours already there. So things are moving so fast at the consumer level, yet the middle folks aren't even close to catching up. Next slide. So let me tell you the most important thing from my perspective to help us in penetration of renewables and grid stability. And it's called the connected home. Let's talk about, I'm going to go back to that concept of inertia. Today, already in Vermont, we have 100 megawatts of wind on a transmission line on our system with only 40 megawatts of load. Now, what that means is there's a lot more water going out than there's a lot more water coming in than there is going out, so it has to go somewhere. And that interface where it goes is what ISO New England watches. Last year, 1/3 of the time, we couldn't operate those wind generators at full production. The reason was because it's unstable, and I'll show you what it looks like from an instability standpoint later. Right now, we're sticking on public policy. Because wind and solar is unstable, and you'll see that from what we call voltage fluctuations, we can't put as much on the system as we'd like. We've approached the limits in most of Vermont Electric Co-op system. We've approached the limits where electrically adding renewables here means we have to shut off renewables here. You don't really contribute renewables. Now let me go back to the capacity factor. You may be scratching your head and say, well, why is that? One of the flaws, and we're working this aggressively right now, one of the flaws with public policy today is it doesn't take into consideration the electrical issues. So if you look at our system, which now has more renewables than it can handle, we have to shut off renewables if more renewables come on. We're successfully getting that through the legislature to understand. You can't just put renewables anywhere without addressing the issue. Now let's talk about public policy goals versus some issues with public policy goals from an engineering standpoint. And now I'm going to get into the renewable energy credit discussion. How many people here have heard of renewable energy credits? Raise your hand. Oh, good, most of you.
In this class.
From my perspective, probably one of the most dishonest things we've ever done. It's really a sad state of affairs because What I've observed now, believe me, I was a big proponent of renewable energy credits. Up until about 2 years ago. The reason is because I realized that it's created a false belief in people. And, one of the things that, even if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said Burlington, Vermont is 100% renewable. But I realize now, if I say that, I'm deceiving you. Because the reason 100% Burlington, Vermont is 100% renewable is because they purchase these things called renewable energy credits. They sell renewable energy credits. The reality is, if you're connected to the grid, you can't be 100% renewable. Now let's go back to the capacity factor and talk about why. Because if your solar panel is producing 15% of the time, our public policy tells you in Vermont that you can push that all out of the grid and use the grid as storage. The reality is, 85% of the time, we're buying replacement power for your solar panel. And typically it's fossil fuel, natural gas. Because go back to the ISO New England control, ISO New England has to keep spinning reserve. And that spinning reserve is natural gas, or oil, but up in New England it's natural gas because gas is so cheap right now. Why do I use natural gas? Because they need to be able to cycle up and down quickly. Just like your lawnmower, you're running and you hit some deep grass, the motor speeds up. But you gotta have the lawnmower running in order to go over that grass. You can't start it up every time you hit grass. And, that doesn't work because it cycles up and down. So we keep all this spinning reserve going. So as the sun, and I'll show you these slides in a few minutes from an electrical standpoint, as the clouds go over and the wind, the puffiness of the wind occurs, which is all the time, there's always reserve there. So even when it's running, we still have reserve, but then at nighttime, we're buying replacement power for you. Now, Vermont's concept was, we'll just push it out of the ISO New England grid. Well, the problem now is Connecticut and Massachusetts has now established their own renewable energy goals. And so they're going to start getting more generation, and this problem will continue to get worse. Now, when we talk about, we have a goal in Vermont that says you will have 15%, you will allow 15% of your peak capacity to be generated with solar. But that 15% only results in a little over 2% savings on energy over the year, because it's only a 15% capacity factor. So when you might have 15% of your generation is solar, but you're only using it 15% of the time. So from an energy standpoint, you aren't really doing a lot to offset the renewables. Now, what people will tell you is you're 100% renewable. The reason for that is because we've established rules that said if you can show renewable energy credits for 100% of your power, you're renewable. Well, that's such a myth. It's not true. So we're really trying to drive out that myth. Let's look at that renewable energy credit market. It's just there are a lot of people profiting on that, but the average consumer is getting the wrong message. Is there any questions on renewable energy credits? Take a moment to challenge me on it, or
didn't Vermont require that they a certain percentage of renewable energy credits can now have to stay in Vermont?
Yes. Yeah, that's about
up until now. I think they've been free to sell them all off out of state, right?
Yeah, and I was very happy about that because we made a lot of money on that. We saved your rates. We're a not-for-profit, but it kept the rates down.
Yeah.
So, but let me talk more about the connected home, because we're really in Vermont, we're at our system anyway, we're approaching the limits of the electrical capability of renewables. But what we're working aggressively on is moving to the connected home. And that's not out there yet. We've done some DOE experiments and things haven't worked, but we're going to continue to work on it. You have a lot of storage available in your home. Storage provides inertia. Storage, such as a hot water heater, a geothermal electric-based heat pumps, electric vehicles, those all have storage, whether it's thermal storage or electrical storage. And, oh, by the way, those are what I would call, non-critical loads. You know, your non-critical loads meaning, how many people here know how many times their hot water heater comes on in the day? Raise your hand if you do. Yeah. No, nobody knows. What do you care about when you turn your hot water faucet on?
Get out.
Is it hot, right? So it doesn't matter if we charge that up at 2 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon or 11 in the morning, as long as you come home and you have hot water. Your electric vehicle, I have an electric vehicle. I plug it in at night. I come out in the morning, it's ready to go. But it only takes about 5 hours to charge. So whether it charges between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. or 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., I don't care. I just want to go out in the morning and have my charged car. The thing about these optional loads, what they do for you is when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing like crazy, we can charge those things up. So it allows us to get more flow into the system, because the more flow we get out, the more flow we can get in. And it also allows us with these storage devices like vehicles to actually take some energy from your car and pay you for it, so you can make some money off it too. So the future is very important for the future from my perspective, that we continue to focus on developing the connected home. Now, what's your big fear about the connected home? Somebody tell me what you're afraid of.
Invasion of privacy.
Invasion of privacy, good.
And susceptibility to sabotage.
Okay, so two great points. Anything else?
A long snowy season with no wind and no sun.
Well, that would be a problem too. Yes. All right, let me first address the privacy. Anybody familiar with Google?
We put it out there. We put it out there.
Yeah, how many people here are connected to the internet and use it regularly? Wow. Your privacy's gone, sorry. And they're more concerned about what you're doing from a sex and gambling standpoint than we are. I just want to know when I can turn your hot water heater off. And I don't care what you use it for. I don't care what you're using your hot tub for. You know, the reality is, we're grid managers. You've surrendered your privacy already. That's done. And what you want is a contractual, well, first of all, even if you saw our electrical signals, you'd never be able to figure out what's going on. And so the privacy issue, we have to get over that utility big brother watching you. First of all, looking at a utility manager who doesn't care. We had someone come in, the receptionist a couple years ago was saying, look at that person. His electric bill is $600 a month and he pays with cash. And what do you mean? I know he's growing pot. I said, I don't care. He comes in every month, pays in cash on time. That's all I care about. Do I care what they're going about? That's somebody else's problem. And I got to think there are very few utility managers out there that really care what's going on with their electricity. If they do, we need to fire them and get someone else who's concerned about the grid. So the other point, security. That's a really important point. Cybersecurity is one of the biggest growing threats we have today. In fact, if you look at if you look at 40% of the cyber attacks that have come into the United States have been directed at the grid infrastructure. I went to 2011, I went to a cybersecurity workshop that really scared me. We were in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Energy. There was a gentleman there who hacked into the security camera at a major intersection in Chicago. We see the picture come up, and then he turns the lights red in both directions. All hacked right in front of our eyes. And then he said, would you like to turn both green? I said, no. Oh. But he made a very powerful point. And our grid is being attacked, and one thing we have to remember is, you know, we're this little utility in northern Vermont. The biggest myth for me to say right now is to say, nobody's going to bother with us. I did say that before 2011. But the Chinese and the Iranians are looking for just where they can get in. If there's an open door, they're going to find it. So cybersecurity is critical. The good news for us And this is something that, if you talk to me about privacy, obviously you're not going to get too much sensitivity because I don't care what you're doing. But when it comes to cybersecurity, now we care, and we all ought to care. If your utility manager doesn't care, what should you do? Find one that cares. The way our system works is we use what's called a power line carrier to signal into the home. Power line carrier means voltage we put over the power line that you can only access through equipment in the substation. So, and we have security cameras at all our sub, we have intrusion devices at all our sub, intrusion protection, and so we're going to know when someone goes in our sub. And oh, by the way, they have to be very sophisticated to figure out how even to get that signal on the line. So we have what's called a single-purpose utility system, and we have been saying since 2003 that we need to maintain single-purpose utility systems separate from the Internet of Things. Now, what do when we get home? We push the signal in the home, and then we use Wi-Fi to get the information back, your regular Internet of Things. The nice thing is those two signals can only meet in our control center, and we use fiber optics to communicate with all of our subs. So we have the most secure and what I believe should be the benchmark for security across the nation. And more people in DOE are starting to agree with that. You've seen utilities put up these RF meters, and I don't believe that RF makes you crazy, because we all be a lot crazy. Well, maybe RF does make us crazy. Maybe that's our problem. No, but I don't. RF's not going to make us any crazier than we are, because we got it all around us anyway.
RF meaning radio.
Oh yeah, thank you. Radio frequency, thank you very much. So there's radio frequency meters tend to be the popular of the industry, but those can be hacked. So cybersecurity needs to be watched very carefully.
Are those what are popularly called smart meters?
We have smart meters, but ours are power line carrier based.
Okay, so that RF doesn't necessarily mean a
Doesn't mean a smart meter, but most of the smart meters are RF. So, and we refuse to accept RF meters all along because of this issue.
You said something a minute ago that I didn't quite follow about where the power line signal switches to Wi-Fi for something?
Yeah, so what we do is we take, thank you for slowing me down on that. Because, again, I'm a recovering engineer and in therapy here too. So the power line, so what we do is we inject a signal on your power line that can be converted in the house to a Wi-Fi signal. So we use the power line to carry those signals, that data that's, just like you get data off the internet today, we transmit it on the power line, and it only can go one way. So if you wanted to hack our system, you couldn't send data back to us through the power line because it's like a one-way street. You can't go the other direction. What we do is, if we're going to, but we're doing a lot of work with this, but if we want to give you incentives to allow us to control your appliance, I personally envision the day, and with our company it's going to be within 5 years, that you'll be able to sit down with your computer, your laptop, or your mobile device, say, only charge my car when the power is below 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And we'll adhere to that, we'll have contracts behind the scenes for all that with you to do that. But so what we'll do is we'll be sending price signals down this power cord every 5 minutes. When that price drops below, and you'll set your own parameters, I don't want you charging my car every 5 minutes, I want it every hour. You can set all those parameters. The idea is you'll be able to set the parameters and walk away and always know that your car is going to be charged. The other component is we want to be able to see if your car is charged. So we'll be using your Wi-Fi signal to see what your charge state is. If you got an electric vehicle today, you'll see that you can see your charge state from anywhere. I can look it up right now and see what my charge state is. So that charge state, if we make a contract with you and say, you're going to charge a car less than 15 cents a kilowatt hour, but you say, look, I don't care what it costs tonight, I got to go take a trip to Maui tomorrow. So you're going to say, you'll say override tonight, and we'll be able to see that signal coming from your Wi-Fi. So now the signals coming from your home are only going in one direction as well. So the only way a hacker could get into our systems, they need to be able to take control of the devices. So they would have to get on this, because all of our substation equipment is controlled by the power line carrier as well. They would, by our single purpose utility network. We also use fiber as well. Point being, they would have to literally hack into our system up in Johnson, Vermont to collapse our network. So that's why it's secure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it helps. Have you, do you have tests, beta tests of this somewhere actually working?
Yeah, it's working with us. It's working with in Minnesota and North Carolina, 2-3 places where they're using this technology. Yes.
If we think about using the electric cars as storage, how do you then get the two-way that you can pull back in times of emergency to use that storage from everybody's electric car that's plugged in if something's going down on the grid?
Well, you catch on well. That's a great question. It's and so what happens with if you're using your vehicle for storage, here's what the public policy would look like. Public policy would say, look, I want to charge my car when the power's under 15 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you buy it, I'm going to sell it to you for 30. Okay? So now what happens is that signal's coming down the line, and all of a sudden the price goes to 30 cents. You're going to say, turn my car back on and connect to the grid and allow us to use the battery. So actually the only thing that happens is your car, and the new vehicles are being equipped with this capability, the older ones haven't, but the car will now discharge into the system. Yeah.
Is there that much storage within a vehicle for the batteries?
My vehicle, typical electric vehicle that's all electric is about 25 kilowatt hours. The average home in Vermont uses about a kilowatt per hour. So that's 25 hours of usage in one car. But my car, since it only goes 20 miles on the charge, it's a plug-in hybrid electric, has 7.6 kilowatt hours of charge. I'll come back to storage in a minute, because storage is the holy grail. And we're all searching that holy grail. Next slide. Before I go, any more questions on the connected home? I don't want to leave that till you answer. Yes?
Well, Peter asked, why doesn't the utility company have mandated storage capacity in every home?
Storage is very expensive. Very, very expensive. So, anybody know what your residential electric rate is, what you're paying?
19 cents in Vermont.
19 cents in Vermont, yeah.
New York is 16.3 kilowatt.
Okay, there you go. So there's the range, 19, 10, 16. The average in the United States is about almost 13 cents now. Storage itself, and this is really a rough estimate, but it's certainly the least expensive we could do storage for would be 23 cents a kilowatt hour. So you would have to add 23 cents to what you're paying today. As I've said to our legislature, we can achieve these renewable goals. It's just I question whether the consumer is willing to pay for it. So your rates would have to be more than double in order to pay for storage. It really is. We could do a lot of things if you're not worried about what you're building. And believe me, I love toys, so if you give me permission, I'm going to be building them.
Tesla is making up a power station or a power pack that you can put into your house, which will give you, I think, at least 8 hours of energy capacity, electrical capacity to run your house.
Yeah, with an average Tesla installation to disconnect from the grid would cost you about $35,000. That gets to the point. Yes, it can be done. We're experimenting, by the way. Any of you storage people are curious about storage. We're the first utility in the United States to get these batteries. We have an Aquion energy battery. Aquion is a little cheaper than Tesla, but it's called AQUION, AquionEnergy.com. It's a battery that uses salt water, carbon, aluminum, and cotton. It's a natural battery. If you look, what the flaw with Tesla is, it uses lithium. You ever want to see some horrible stories? Just Google, where does lithium come from? You'll see places like Inner Mongolia and China, which are most. Yep. So again, we look at these solutions, we got to consider the environmental impact, and is the solution worse than the problem, right? Yes.
In order to have this work, there would have to be rewiring in the house, right? You've got to take the water heater and the car charger and separate that from the rest of the electrical load, right?
Well, there's two answers to that question. First of all, no, not with today's technology, because we have these plug-in devices that will allow your devices to be spoken to. And the North American Manufacturers Association is now putting in chips in all the new appliances. Anybody bought a new appliance lately and seen it's Wi-Fi enabled? Yes. Yeah. They're pre-positioned. Our national group has been working with the National Appliance Manufacturers Association, and so the investor utilities, to get these chips put in all new devices so that capability exists to communicate with them. But they would communicate using Wi-Fi in your home. Any other questions about?
So if these chips are in all new appliances, isn't that a means of cyber espionage in terms of having something that would just disable all of them at once?
Well, if you think about it, if some cyber espionage person wants to disable all the refrigerators, that's one thing. That doesn't take down the grid. And I'm not sure what the impact would be. You know, you got to think of cost versus benefit from when you're a terrorist. You know, it's like, yeah. So that those issues are there. I wouldn't argue they're there. You might, but those issues already exist today. For example, your televisions are all the new televisions are Wi-Fi equipped for a long time. And oh, by the way, many people are on cable anyway. So people are, those exist. But what we have to make sure we do, from as a utility manager, is make sure that they can't get to our grid, disable the grid. Now, if those things start happening, you can bet that the Wi-Fi, the National Association of Manufacturers will start paying attention more to their security issues. But that hasn't. Nobody's really collectively shut off appliances yet. But the impact, again, is not big. Might be a big impact to you if you lose your cheese and your eggs, but okay. There's the grid going down for any length of time, as you all probably know, would be catastrophic. So, what have I here? Oh yeah, continuing on policy. I asked our legislature in 2014, what's your goal here? Is your goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or is it to create jobs? Because if it's to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, there's a lot better ways to do that. But their goal is also to create jobs. Now we're going to get back to social policy about how are those jobs being created. In Vermont, we pay 20 cents a kilowatt hour for every kilowatt that's generated in a solar panel, and people can roll their meter back to zero. By the way, our residential rate is 17 cents. We pay them 20. So you make 3 cents on every kilowatt you use. The other piece is you're allowed to roll back your entire meter charge and all other charges to zero. The average cost per member to maintain the grid runs about $35 a month. So what happens if you're rolling your entire year's worth of bill to zero and you're a solar user? Somebody else pays. Yeah, so that pay gets transferred. So, up until 2016, we were okay with that because it was in the noise level. It was about a 2% issue. But now that the cost of solar has gone down so much, it's a developer's dream. Because think of it, we can build, I'll tell you our data, we're building our solar fields for 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Our members love Suncom, and Suncom along says, I'm going to guarantee you a 5% savings on your bill. Well, what's the difference between 12 and 20? Right? So somebody's making a lot of money on this, and we've challenged those folks to say, look, our books are completely open. We have a public policy contract with the public. You can look at our numbers, every single one of them. You want guaranteed rates, you should be opening your books too. So,
But in New Hampshire, we pay a monthly charge, a so-called connectivity charge. It's not $30, it's only $12.75. But we pay that, but then we bank the hours. We don't, there's no financial exchange between a solar panel hookup and the company.
yeah, in New Hampshire, yours looks more typical of the rest of the country. It's still a going out of business model because what we do is we have 35. The average cost for grid support is $35 a month. We actually charge $18 a month, and we make up the rest of that with kilowatt hour sales. Now, right now it's a 2% issue, but with the aggressiveness of the developers, it looks like that's going to be about 2% a year increase. And ultimately, I just think about the poor old lady up in Belvedere, who doesn't have a computer, who's disconnected, and what's happening with her rates. And if you look at California, there was a great study done by Berkeley that shows 80% of the rooftop solar installations have been done by people who make $50,000 or more. Now that actually represents about the break point for the average median income for our users. So what you can take from that is that you've got this reverse subsidization going on from the poor to some of the wealthy. And for us, economic justice is one of our core principles of the cooperative principles. If you look at cooperative principle number 3, again, these were developed in the late 1800s out in England, not even thinking of utilities. Members share equitably in the capital costs, and they have to, and they do that through a democracy.
So the model we have today, wasn't it essentially put in place, these policies, weren't they put in place as an incentive to promote the development of solar, even if, and maybe this wasn't mentioned at the time, in the long term, they're not sustainable?
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
And that's exactly. So I've personally been involved with the net metering legislation since 2000. Actually, was proud to say I helped the first person on our system do their net meter installation. And we were equally positive until 2011, because it was, by 2011, we began to realize those policies have been successful. So now of course, what happens with subsidies, now everything is subsidized. So this is, but it's a question of
Who pays?
It's a question of who pays, exactly.
that's
And what
the
your goal is.
taxpayers pay.
And what your goal is.
Right.
We've achieved our goal. Solar costs have come down to the point where every wise utility manager will invest in solar. Because if you look at the 20-year cost, what we estimate is our 20-year local cost of power based on today's natural gas market, which is pretty darn low, is about 13.5 cents, and we can build it for 12. So if you got a utility manager who's not buying the lowest priced power, what do you do? Yes.
What, do we know the percentages, I guess you might say, of solar on an individual's home versus solar by big developers and so forth?
God, I love this class.
Because, it seems pretty easy to just say the little guy gets a break still, but the big guy doesn't. I mean, why can't we do that?
Beautiful question. And now you're getting into the whole issue of how democracy works in America, right? But let me, you picked up on a very fine point that we're continuing to make. Greater than half of our solar cap has been filled with large-scale solar developers. So if it was just rooftop solar that was being promoted, it'd be a 2% issue, because only about 30% of the homes even have the capacity to put solar on. People don't want to cut the roofs up, they don't want to cut the trees down, people live in condos, live in apartments. So that policy by itself would be fine. In fact, in 2011, when the policy started, it was 15 kilowatts and below. Average rooftop installation in our system is 6 kilowatts, which meant it was clearly limited to rooftop solar. And by the way, you couldn't roll, you still had to pay your service charge, which is similar to what New Hampshire's doing. Which New Hampshire's got, if I was in New Hampshire, I'd be okay with that, because as a utility, you'd still be able to recover your charges in other ways. And I'll get to that in a minute, because I still think we need some policy to help drive the business model to change. I'll get back to that. But the point being, if it was rooftop solar alone, that was fine. And that, there was an adoption rate. But in 2011, some people saw some opportunity to make some big money. So they bumped it up to 150 kilowatts. So, and then in 2014, they bumped up to 500 kilowatts. Now, of course, they want the cap completely removed. And so it's being, again, your question's a great one, because the average consumer needs to understand is, it's not the average consumer who's taking advantage of this. It's the solar developers.
Vermont has just hit the cap, hasn't it?
We've hit the cap. And more than half of that's been taken off by large projects.
But aren't the big developers in that for the subsidies?
Of course, of course.
The government subsidies that we're all paying.
If you look at, we as a co-op, we do not donate to anybody's campaign. We're completely, my job is to remain, for you not to know what my political, you might be able to figure it out if you meet for a while. But, I'm not out there supporting political. All right, you're doing a great job asking questions. I love it. So let's go back to that public policy issue again, around asking the question to the legislature. Do you want to reduce greenhouse gases, or do you want to reduce, or do you want to support jobs? And I showed them these charts. They were a little different then, but pretty much the same thing here. If you look at Vermont, here's our carbon. This is from the Comprehensive Energy Plan that was just done on the Vermont Department of Public Service website. This shows in Vermont what our carbon profile looks like, and you'll be able to see it better online. But transportation accounts for almost half of our carbon in Vermont. Heating and cooling represents about a third. Residential commercial fuel use represents about I think that's 31%. But anyway, this section here represents transportation and heating cooling. Our electrical is right here. So, and of course, it's right in line with agriculture. So if you were going to design public policy to reduce carbon, where would you focus first? Yeah, exactly. So now let's talk about the impact of solar on reducing carbon. Solar, remember, has a capacity factor of 15%. If we could, but we can't, because we got the limitations I already described electrically. Even if we maxed out our solar with 11%, assuming we have no storage, and I'll get to storage in a minute, you're going to do 15% of 11%, which is less than 2%. So you've got a public policy that's driving the effectiveness for resolving carbon is not very good. Wind is actually a little better because it has 30% capacity factor. But then I get the question, and I asked this question, you look at the first person that led the whole effort to build this big, huge wind project in Vermont that got a large percentage of our population angry. I say, I'm not sure that it makes sense to tear up our ridge lines, for a 30% capacity factor. Maybe if you had a 100% capacity factor, it would be different. But that's all the debate you have. This is the public policy debate. Should we be tearing up our ridge lines? Now, but I love wind. So why do I love wind? Now I'm going to talk as a utility manager, not as a citizen. I can do the same. Sun shines brightly in July. In December, the sun's only producing a third of the energy it did in July. The wind's only blowing about 7% of the time in July. It's blowing about 50% of the time in December. When I talk about 30%, that's an average for the year. The wind blows really hard from November through April in Vermont. And that's just when the sun's not out. So if you're going to do an effective renewable policy, And I continue to say this to our legislature. They haven't yet banned wind, but they're getting a lot of pressure to ban wind. I say, well, you just cut your effectiveness on renewables by 2/3. So you either want to solve the carbon problem or you don't. So I have 2 points. You're going to solve the carbon problem, I'd go for the biggest contributor and really put my efforts there. If you want to create jobs, let's figure a way to do it without having other people pay for it.
One point, the solar generates more power in March and April than it does in July.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Although on a per hour basis, you have more hours of sunlight in summer, so.
The problem with it, when you talk to utility managers, is March and April doesn't do us much good because that's our lowest load months. You know, our peak load months are July, which the solar does help. But I'm going to show you what's happening with solar now that we have a lot of solar. Solar is no longer effective for reducing peaks in July. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So I want to make the point about greenhouse gases. You know, in the United States, electricity's a bigger proponent of the greenhouse gases. So from a national policy standpoint, it makes sense. But in Vermont, we've been attacking this for a long time, especially our efficiency programs. Our average home uses about half the power of the average home in the United States. The average home in the United States is 1,200 kilowatt hours a month. Our average is 500. So that alone has cut that wedge significantly, you see.
Why is that?
Why have we?
Why does Vermont use half
We,
the city of the average household in the United States?
again, so you know, I am a big proponent of public policy. In the late 90s, Vermont put together an efficiency organization. It's called Efficiency Vermont, to focus on efficiency. Because when you tell me as a utility manager that I have to sell less power, my brain goes nuts. You know, it doesn't work for me to be. It's working now. I finally figured it out, and I'll get to that in a minute. But it took a long time for this to get in my brain. Well, I should tell you, I've only been in utility since 2000. But in the late 90s, Vermont was watching their electric load go up 5% a year, along with the rest of the nation, following the same pattern. They decided to put a tax on your electric bill and use that money to fund efficiency programs. And it was the most effective efficiency, it's been referred to as the most effective efficiency program in the country. It worked. But you can see the curve, the growth curve leveled out by about 2000, and it's actually slowly gone down. So and efficiency is clearly the first place you should focus if you're talking about return on investment. Because if you look at the cost of efficiency versus the cost of other programs, it's easily a third of what the next best policy is. So.
I'm assuming that these efficiencies were insulation and...
Thermal efficiency came later, but it started with simple things like changing out your light bulbs to CFLs. Now we're funding LEDs. You can buy an LED bulb in Vermont for $5. A lot commercial industrial work done in terms of changing motors out to what they call variable frequency drives and other things. So a lot of work just looking at appliance by appliance efficiency and incentivizing efficient appliances. So you can go, for example, I just bought an air source hot water heater and I got a $400 rebate from the state. Air source water heaters are 300% efficient. In every kilowatt hour you put in, you get 3 kilowatts of heat out. So they're highly efficient. Say, I know matter cannot be created nor destroyed. That's an important part of physics. But what this does is it uses a reverse air conditioner to take the heat out of the air. So, next slide. So here's our supply mix. Now this is the one I really love to throw out here, because this gets to, let's forget renewable energy credits for a minute. I'm not saying we're renewable, because we still buy and trade and sell renewable energy credits. So if I told you our power is renewable, I'd be violating rules of the Federal Trade Commission. But if you look at our energy supply mix, 60% hydro, 20% solar, and 20% solar, methane, and wood, and let's see, so 60 plus 20, we're 80% purchasing power from renewable sources already. We also purchase 18% nuclear. Our fossil, we're 95% plus carbon free already. So the question, that's why I throw that from the legislature, you know, it's been improving. Back in 2014, we were still pretty darn close. I threw that legislation, if you're trying to solve carbon, we're already there. So, now the point being, if you tell us, if you say you want us to be 80% renewable, we can do that tomorrow. We just have to raise your rate 6%. Which, I don't know whether that's good or bad. Again, that's a public policy debate. It's not for me to determine. You know, I'm just here to tell you the facts. We can be 80% renewable tomorrow, but I'd rather continue to focus on rates. Our member surveys show that about 45% of our residential users are willing to pay 5% more for renewables. Turns out our mix is half residential, half commercial industrial. I should tell you that only 8% of our commercial industrial are willing to pay more. But at the same time, the other half are concerned about rates. So I'm in a position from a public, and I just want to do a good job. And good job means try to carry out public policy. So that public policy, the way my member survey says is, look, we want renewables, but you need to do it in the least expensive way possible.
And you talk about it affecting their rates, but does it affect their taxes as well, their state taxes? I mean, Vermont's known as a high.
Oh yeah, we're high.
State taxes, is that part of it too?
Well, I would say no, because the energy funds are kept separate from the tax funds so far. You know, we haven't stolen from the electric funds to do the roads areas. So I think it's fair to say that it's separate.
Presumably you as a co-op have control over these percentages.
Yes.
You've made some decisions here to buy X% of this type or the other. What, other than good PR for being renewable, why are you doing it this way? You're still, as you say, you still have to make a business survive.
Great, another great question. You're getting to our policies, our internal policies. And it goes back to, I'm able to say we've been able to keep rates stable for seven years. With our strategy, we're not going to win the lottery, but we're not going to lose the farm. We could do it cheaper if we just bought natural gas, but that market is so volatile. So what I truly believe in my short history on Earth is that our members want their rates stable. You know, people always forget when you give them a rate decrease. They remember when you give them a rate increase. So since about 2007, our focus has been stability. These are stable sources. You know, this hydro consists of about half of that consists of contracts with Hydro-Quebec. The other half is hydro facilities in the state, and we do 20-year contracts. You know, you get 20-year contracts for this. You can't get anything over. Just recently, we started getting 4-year contracts for this. Just to give you an idea, our average, so think about the fact that we're paying 12 cents for our solar, 20 cents for rooftop solar. We just closed a 4-year market deal for natural gas power for 3 3/4 cents. So if we weren't concerned with carbon, and I still don't think we'd buy gas, because if you had to pay market rates, it would drive you crazy. Because there were times in 2014 during the winter months that we were paying over $2 a kilowatt hour for power on the market because it was natural gas based. So the market.
Sorry, one last question. Does the Vermont Co-op have any of its own generating capacity, or is it all bought from outside sources?
We have wind and solar now.
That's it?
Yeah, we got out, wind and solar we can handle from a financial standpoint. But for example, right now, the state, we've been asked to look at, with the rest of the utilities, at the state's dams on the Connecticut River, which that price tag, we looked at that 5 years ago. They were asking $500 million. Our estimates were they were only worth $240 million. But the future market prices have gone up, which kind of goes which goes contrary to what I just said about gas. But future market prices are up. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is all the spinning reserve in that 3.2%?
No, the spinning reserve. So when you purchase power, you purchase energy and capacity. The capacity. So now I guess what I was trying to avoid this issue because I don't want your heads to explode. all the policies we deal with. So we have to purchase capacity for all the energy, meaning you have to reserve space on the generators. And that's called the forward capacity market. And that price has been going up significantly. Why is it, and I'm going to get to why it's going up. The forward capacity market prices are going to continue to rise dramatically. And I'll tell you why in a minute, because I want to get to the electrical piece and how that electrical piece feed back to the public policy piece. So that 3 3/4 cents kilowatt hour, that was just for energy. I'll touch on forward capacity in a minute. Next slide. So, just policy considerations. Hydro, the ability to get hydro is going down due to run-of-the-river requirements. All across the nation, including Vermont, the Agency of Natural Resources are telling utilities they can't pond as much water as they used to because it has big impacts on the environment. And my job is not to second-guess Agency of Natural Resources. We've got a lot of smart people there. They're just telling us we can't pond as much water. So people say, what about hydro? Well, hydro is not a good investment for anybody at this point because of the run-of-the-river requirements. And then aesthetics, no more wind. People don't want large solar. We're starting to get a lot of pushback on large solar. We can't do pump storage in Vermont because you think people got mad at me over a wind project. We're like, cut off a mountain, put a big pond there. It's only filled once a day. You can't support life. Small solar is twice the price of large solar. The RPS is based on energy. Forget it, not just consumption. Production is on capacity factor. Wind, now, I don't want to miss this one, so that slide here. Wind and solar drives down the grid load factor. The grid load factor is the capacity factor measurement of the grid. So you saw, that's why this number is here. This 450,000 megawatt hours is what you use on an annual basis. But our grid is capable of about 800 megawatts entirely. And so the daily usage, so our average grid capacity is used 55% of the time. So we have a capacity factor of 55%. Take the nameplate capacity, multiply it times 8760, put that in the 450,000 hours factor, and you come up with 55%. We're using our grid 55% of the time. Going back to manufacturing, if you've got a piece of capital and you want to get the unit cost down, you use it more, right? So we want to continue to focus on rates. Wind and solar, so what if now we're telling people our grid is limited, they're saying, well, just build new lines. Well, we're going to build a line, our grid factor is another key measure for me is capacity factor of the grid, load factor. Along with that, safety, that's another key measure I watch because that drives your cost. So we're 55% load factor. We build a transmission line to something that's only 15%, what's it going to do to our efficiency of our grid? Or 30%. So building infrastructure for wind and solar, in my opinion, is a flawed strategy because you're going to drive the cost of the infrastructure up on each unit cost. Does that make sense? Yep. So these are all the policy considerations a utility manager faces. And I hope I'm not sounding negative at all. Because the more challenges, the more fun it is. So. Next slide.
Question? How is Germany doing it? Every place you go, they have these beautiful wind fields.
Germany they're paying about 42 cents a kilowatt hour for their electricity. That's my point. We can solve the problem. It's just you've got to be willing to pay for it. So far, my message is.
It's like a be careful what you wish for thing.
Yeah. And the good news about my job is I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't, no matter what it is. That way, it lets me do the right thing.
I want to say about the German situation, there are two factors in that. One is, of course, that they're buying very expensive power. Another is that they're very afraid of losing their manufacturing ability.
Yes.
So retail electricity is charged far more than manufacturing electricity, which means that consumers are kind of underwriting it. I don't think that the 42 cents is just because they have a lot of wind turbines. I think it's partially because they have a lot of wind turbines and they want their manufacturers to have cheap power, so they'll stay in Germany.
It's interesting, our co-op policy is the same. We have some of the highest residential rates in the state, but we have the lowest commercial industrial rates in the state. Our philosophy is the same, and our members help us with that philosophy. They're like, hey, if we lose our jobs, we're screwed. We'll pay the extra money. This chart, by the way, it's in the handout. I'm not going to take you through it. But this is probably the most, the National Energy Policy Institute is probably about the most comprehensive study I've seen of the effectiveness of public policies in terms of reducing carbon. So the smaller the number, the smaller this thing, the less effective it is. Of course, this is on this scale, the least effective carbon policy is a subsidy for hybrid vehicles. The most effective, I hate to tell you, is a cap and trade carbon tax. So, of course, if you go back to the slide and you look at most of our carbon in Vermont coming from the transportation of fossil fuels, that's what makes sense. Somewhere in the middle is wind and solar. Next slide. Now, I'm going to get into some of the electrical issues, switching from public policy, because I think we're going to run out. I'll get to it all, but just running out of time. I talked about solar versus wind. This is a graph of exactly what happens. The red line is when solar produces. The yellow line is when wind produces. You can see that wind production is down when solar production is up. Wind production is up when solar production is down. So from a utility manager, from my perspective, I want both if I'm going to achieve renewable policies. Next slide. Now, I want to talk about peaks. Peaks are, a peak day is the day, the hour, the way it works in New England is we pay for our share of the New England transmission grid, which is, it's, I don't know what the costs are, but it's somewhere over $1 trillion in terms of grid. We pay our share of it based on our peak hour during our peak day. So every year our transmission bill is determined by the peak hour of the peak day. Then they charge Vermont by the peak hour of the peak day. And then, so the idea being, if we build an infrastructure for the maximum energy you're ever going to use, we have to build it for that, otherwise it collapses. If you got a water hose and you try to get more water out of it than it can deliver, it isn't going to happen. Something's got to shut off, right? So the very, very good theory, being that, hey, we've got to build this for your highest use, so you should pay for the highest use. That's how we pay our transmission. Now in 2014, our peak day was winter, and here's the nuclear share. This is because we had Vermont Yankee. And I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not proposing any, I'm not trying to be an advocate for any energy source. We can talk about that over a beer, but I'm not going to let you know what it is now. Because of the public policy, everybody's got their opinions, right? So I'm just going to tell you the facts. Nuclear was a large chunk of Vermont's generation. So we look at the total load was 1,029 megawatts. We had 28 megawatts of wind running at the time, and we had no solar running at the time. During the summer, a little bit different. 1,006 megawatts, we had 16 megawatts of solar, and 72 megawatts of wind. So there's the wind and there's the solar during the peak summer day. Now let's go to the next slide to show you the contrast to last year. Last year, now this is happening because we've got so much solar. It's changed the slope. Solar is producing well during the summer day. You can see that our load went down. I think it was 1,016 before. We're 989 megawatts now. So it did bring it down by about 40 megawatts. But our peak day had no solar because it occurred again in the winter. But our summer peak day had no solar either, because now our peaks are occurring September at 8 p.m.
What are ties?
Ties are the power coming in through power line ties. In other words, we had no, the other point. The other point is that's how much generation we had in Vermont. You saw before it was mostly generated in Vermont. Now we just bring it all in from other areas. Vermont's becoming, every hour is now taking in more power than it generates. Now why do you suppose that is? We closed Vermont Yankee. Vermont Yankee was 650 megawatts. So that's what, that's just the reality. That's what happens. And by the way, these ties were mostly natural gas.
I felt that we should, it says ties, but really on the grid, it's more than half natural gas, so it's really
That's right.
worth
Yeah.
pointing out that
Yeah, it's
that's
gas.
what most of that's coming from.
Our carbon, Vermont's total carbon footprint went up. Although ours, from a contractual standpoint, VEC's still pretty clean, but if you look at electron flow, this is what's happening.
And that's because Vermont Yankee closed.
Vermont Yankee, we closed a big generator. That was carbon free.
So Vermont can feel really good that but they're using everybody else's, their power is being generated elsewhere.
I think that's an excellent point.
But to your point, the rates are staying the same.
We've been able to keep the rates stable, but the futures, we're running out of rabbits, so that's not gonna, because of the challenges, until we solve this net metering cross-subsidization problem, as well as the transmission efficiency and all this, is gonna create upward pressure. Yes?
When you're talking about rates to the consumer, are you talking just about what it says on the bill, the generation charge, not all the delivery charges and stuff? Or-
Well, in Vermont, we don't have all that, you just have a bill.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it includes
everything.
more than just the generation, it
Yes,
includes the delivery, et
Yeah,
cetera.
yeah, we're still vertically integrated. Next slide, please. What am I trying to see here? Oh, yeah, net meter. So here's what we're paying. Here's the curve of net meter solar, what we have to pay versus our residential rate. That delta is coming from others. That's one problem. The problem is we're paying more for solar than you're actually paying us. So that's pretty flawed from a policy standpoint. Next slide. Now here's another challenge. Because of the solar has now producing more in the summer, it's changed the whole dynamics of the New England grid. So, if you look at peak solar, our peak during the last summer, we paid 4.5 cents a kilowatt. Yeah, 4.5 cents, 5 cents a kilowatt, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So when the sun was shining and all these solar panels are running, we're paying, the market cost is 5 cents a kilowatt hour. In the winter, we averaged 16 cents, I think the price was. No, 10, I guess it's 10. Oh yeah, over here. So this period, we're paying 6 cents for the replacement power for those solar panels, 16 cents, when they're producing nothing. So we got this dynamic where the summer, the solar panels with their peak production, market price power is 4.5 cents. Winter, when they're not producing, the market price power is 16 cents.
Why is Vermont paying so much for the solar from, is that public policy?
It's public policy, yeah. We're speaking up on it. But I'm trying to show the connection between public policy and electricity. Those two are intrinsically intertwined. But we have a citizen legislature, of course. They're dealing with a lot of stuff, not just energy. So believe me, I respect what those legislators do every day. I like to say, if I die and I wake up a legislature, I know I live a bad life. Because it's hard, you got my job relative to deciding whether your tax money should go to feed poor children, versus I don't have to pay this. It's nice to be a recovering engineer. Next slide. So this shows what happens as we increase the penetration of net metering based on the current policy, which we're trying to get changed. The rise in rates continues because less people are paying more for the infrastructure. So it's next slide. Now here's the other point I made. Solar costs, this again, you've heard all this. I just showed these slides are in there just as data backup. So the solar costs have gone down to the point, even without tax incentives, it's still cheaper than market power. This is the Vermont price point where we would buy solar power. You can see, the price with incentives is well below, it dropped below in 2010. And the price without incentives had just dropped to the point now where we can. So just recently. So now, my point on this slide is you don't need those incentives anymore. Price of solar is cheaper than the Vermont price point, and any wise utility managers can buy as much solar as they can. Next slide. Okay, so good, I got time for the electrical. So this is the electrical stuff. So these are actual charts from our SCADA. When I use the term SCADA, it's called System Control and Data Acquisition. It's a term that the whole industry understands, but it's Greek to everybody else, and you should forget about it as soon as I say it. But when I say SCADA, it means our control system. We're looking at all of our power being used. So this is actual April load. You can see cloudy day. So here's what used to be. So this is a one day that runs from here to here. It used to be before solar, this would just continue to climb, and our peak would be somewhere around here. But with solar, even on a cloudy day, it drops it. At 2 p.m., the load dropped 8 megawatts. On a sunny day, it dropped 14 megawatts. So it completely changes the structure of the load. But look at our peak. That didn't change much at all. That's what we pay our transmission costs on. Our transmission costs represent about 20% of your electric bill. Next slide. Oh, back one. So, some of the electrical considerations. The grid's an unstable system. I talked about that. The grid was designed around inertia. I talked about that. Spinning generation was the key. Wind and solar is connected to inverters, which I know inertia creates harmonics. This is the next thing I want to talk about, which we don't even. I'm on the DOE task force to look at these things. I was in Boston reviewing their long-term grid modernization plan, and it all occurred to us, geez, we don't understand harmonics. I want to talk about harmonics in a minute. Wind and solar are not dispatchable. I want to make that point too. The reason ISO New England will shut wind and solar off before anything else is because when the grid starts collapsing, they've got to be able to call on generation in a heartbeat and get it to turn on the grid. You can't do that with wind and solar because you don't really know what this could be there. Next slide. So these are harmonics. Harmonics are something, remember I talked about spinning generation? From an engineer standpoint, we love this nice curve, goes up and down. That's what comes out of a spinning generator. What comes out of inverters is all this other stuff, all this other noise. That noise, by the way, we didn't, forgive me, but we didn't even think about the consumer until 2 weeks ago. We were thinking about our substation equipment. And this was literally at a meeting in Boston 2 weeks ago, where we're talking about our substation equipment, and someone said, what about the consumer appliances? All the DOE engineers looks at each other, geez, we don't even know what's going on with consumer appliances. But we know, one thing we know is this creates heat in our transformers, it creates heat in our equipment. Since our equipment's all been designed around this wave right here, you got all this other stuff coming in, that actually creates heat. And there's an equation that's called Arrhenius equation of acceleration for anybody interested, that shows the direct correlation between heat and life of equipment. So we in the utility world understand, keep the equipment cool, it lasts a lot longer. Just like us humans, right? Keep us cool, we'll last a lot longer. So keep it cool, it'll last a lot longer. And so we now need to really study and evaluate what these harmonics mean. These harmonics are a result of the inverters. We have close to 700 solar installations on our system today. We had about 400 last year, probably about 200 the year before. We started with 1 in 2000. All these things are introducing this electrical noise, including the wind projects. So I'm here to tell you, we don't have a clue what this is doing to your equipment, to your home. But one thing I can tell you from a physics standpoint, it's degrading the life of your equipment.
Isn't the amount of harmonics, though, in an inverter, it's not a constant, it's not dictated by physics. Aren't inverters getting closer to a real sine wave on output, better inverters?
Well, we're not seeing that. Yeah, it has to do with load switching. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't think any of us know. The problem is we don't know. I don't think I could say that with a surety, because none of the DOE engineers can say with a surety. We know we're seeing a lot. Our SCADA data, the data we're looking for, shows tremendous amount of harmonics in the system we didn't have before. Can I tell you exactly where they're coming from? No. But it's the same phenomena seen all across the country. Could be CFLs. CFLs create, but we don't know.
Is there any move to put in connection standards for things with inverters?
Yes.
So they have to filter it before it goes on the grid?
Yes, there's this IEEE standard for inverters. I think it's IEEE 1754 or something. It's that there's a big debate going on about how we change the inverters, which might get to the point you're discussing. We're talking about how to change these inverters. What we want to do is have well, I'm not getting into details, you know, but the there does need to be some standards upgrades for inverters. There are some national groups looking at it, but this problem exists today, and we need to understand it more. Next slide. So I talked about the impact of harmonics, communication interference. You know, if you're, but not many people are using radios these days. Okay, now let's talk about the electrical issues with solar. So here's an actual, pull this again from our SCADA system. This was April 23rd at noon. This was a cloudy day. This was a 2.2 megawatt solar field. You know, it's one of those big solar fields you see, probably 7 or 8 acres of solar. And it's in Barton, Vermont. And this is, look at what was happening to the output of this system. Again, spinning generator, it would stay there and stay flat, and you'd adjust it when you need to. This is what makes us crazy from an electrical standpoint. Now, trying to compensate for that is difficult. So you see this thing is producing 1.8 megawatts, and within like a 30-second period, it goes down to 0.6. It loses, you know, it loses 1.2 megawatts. More than half, it loses half its output drops off. And you can see it's cloudy days. What happens? They're cycling up and down. Now we're doing everything we can to protect your equipment from that. We watch our voltages. We've got our SCADA system. But remember, we're like one of the most advanced utilities in the nation. Most utilities don't even have this capability to look at this. Next slide. Here's wind production. Same thing. See, puffiness of the wind all over the place. So those are, that was, what was the date on that? I don't know. A 7-day period in April. But this is all real data you're looking at off our system.
Does it take, this is a simple question, I apologize, but does it take more energy to bring it back up? You know,
Yes.
in all your
Yes.
squiggly
Yes.
lines,
That-
it takes
that-
more energy than.
Very nice observation. That requires energy, just like your car.
Yes.
It's just, it goes the same thing as your car. When you accelerate, decel your car, it takes energy to slow it, speed up. If you got an electric
Right.
vehicle, you take, you know, your batteries will be regenerative and stuff. But I talked about this curtailment. This is actually the area that's curtailed because we've got so much renewable generation on it. Now, what we did, if you go back to those, you don't need to go back, but if you go back and remember those wind and solar slides, the bouncing us up and down. For the first 2 years of our wind project, we were theoretically supposed to get like 32% capacity, and we were only getting 15% because we couldn't run it all the time. What we did to fix the problem was we put a big honking flywheel on this. Between the wind generator and this grid, we have this big, massive flywheel. We introduce inertia. So the output of the wind goes into the flywheel, spins it. If you ever go up to J Vermont and J Peak, you can send me a note. I'll tell you where our sub is. You can see this huge building that looks like a barn. There's just a big flywheel in there. One end is a motor, electric motor. The other end is a generator. In the middle is this big flywheel. And that stabilizes it. But that costs about, total project cost was about 160 million. That added 12 million to the project cost. A very significant expense. And oh, by the way, the total round trip losses, you know, is about 5%. So we're losing about 5% of our energy. Good news is we were able to get our capacity factors up, but we had to sacrifice some efficiency. Next slide. So what are we doing about it? Well, first of all, what you just saw here in the harmonics of discussion, there's not even enough compute power to analyze this because of the way computers work today. So Pacific Northwest Labs working on software application to enable real-time grid analysis so we can understand what's going on on a minute-by-minute basis. I'm here to tell you we don't really know. We have a partnership with IBM to develop highly accurate weather forecasting, to improve forecasting for renewables. We can improve the forecasting, we can use them better. And extensive research on storage technologies. Storage technologies aren't effective but we're all watching it. That's the holy grail. And we're continued research and application of home and air networks. And we got 5 minutes, so any final questions?
They're actually on the web already.
Okay. Good.
Would a lot of these problems be solved if we got rid of AC and then went over to DC? Like,
Oh, sure, but problem is, it's just like GM headed down the hydrogen car, right? Hydrogen fuel cells were the big talk, and you got to change the whole infrastructure. That's why I wanted to talk about, there's policy inertia and there's electrical inertia. That's called policy inertia, right? Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, on one of the slides, the supply mix that you had, the trend for solar was definitely going up in the use. And the trend for
Hydro going down.
natural gas was going way down.
Yes.
So assuming you have a 10-year trend or 20-year trend, it almost looked like natural gas would be 0 and solar would be 30% in the next 10 years.
Well, we can't get there because of all the electrical issues. Point is, I think in Vermont, at least on our grid, we've really started to approach our limits. Until we figure out the electrical stuff, we can't put any more on. We either have to build infrastructure, which wouldn't be wise investment. You know, we have to figure out, that's why this whole presentation was about how do we optimize this whole thing. We have to figure out how to optimize it. There's no real solution other than continuing to work on the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Just, Ukraine just got hacked, or recently
Yep.
got hacked.
That's right, yeah.
And they lost a large majority of their power grid system. What would that happen to a utility company trying to put the load back online?
It's just, if you go back to 2014, was it 2000, I don't remember, 50 million people lost power. It took probably a day to get everything back online. It's probably, it's called a black start. You can assume that if we lost a major part of our grid, it would take us 3 days to, it depends how big the loss area was. But it would take us probably around 3 days. Now, people aren't going to die in 3 days.
It would depend on the nature of the loss. I mean, if towers blow up
Oh, yeah.
in transmission lines, it's gonna take longer.
Yeah, I was talking about cybersecurity hack, that's a great point. If somebody really knew what they were doing, they could really create some chaos, but, yeah. So I'm not necessarily worried about that, but that would take a lot. They'd probably take 9 strategically sited explosions. I've already seen the data, he's done the studies.
In some of the blackouts in history, if I have this right, some areas were saved because their operators disconnected themselves from the failing parts. Are there automated systems now that would do that automatically? You talk about 15 milliseconds. Can you isolate yourself for safety that quickly?
Yes, in fact, I'm proud to say that Time Magazine talked about Vermont keeping that blackout from hitting the rest of New England, because I was actually in the control center the day after that storm track, that day after that, and that it was really some humans just saying, hey, we got these reverse flow phones, what's happening here? At that time, the electrical stuff didn't do it. It was a smart operator who shut off Vermont, shut the grid ties to New York, and they did that quickly. It was pretty amazing. And that was really a hero of a control system operator. You'll never see them on Time Magazine, but this person was a hero. Today, we have electrical devices that, again, we're installing aggressively, and the DOE is trying to get utilities to install them. There's field devices that we have on our power lines that will actually shut off circuits when a voltage drops below a certain level or a frequency drops below a certain level. So that is something we're doing, yes. Other questions?
Yeah. How much of a frequency drop does it take to to get back on, to get the thing leveled off? I mean, when you overload a little bit, you lost some
Yeah,
power,
frequency,
and your frequency drops the hair, and then you pick up something and it gets back up. How much of a frequency loss trips that?
Our set point for these field devices is 59.62 cycles. So, that's when it'll drop out the lines. But the grid operators try to keep the frequency within 1%, and they have 5% limits, so it's 60 times 0.5. 3 times 1%.
Okay, I'm gonna say we should probably bring this to, first, let's thank Christine very,